My name is Mark Harrison. I'm 31 years old, and the modest, almost miraculous windfall I just received, money that felt less like an acquisition and more like a hard-won metal forged in the crucible of years of solitary late nights, the relentless, eye-straining glow of a monitor reflecting off my tired face, the endless, intricate dance of coding, debugging, and despairing, all culminating in a significant, terrifying gamble on myself. That precious sum was, I could already feel it in the pit of my stomach, about to become the fiercely contested new battleground in my family's long, often undeclared, but perpetually simmering war against my personal autonomy. Just 2 weeks prior, after a nerve-wracking negotiation process that had stretched on for what felt like an eternity, I'd finally signed the papers, selling a niche software application. Querycraft, I'd named it, an elegant little tool for independent researchers and data analysts. I'd poured nearly 3 years of my spare time into its development, chiseling away at the code in the cramped, perpetually untidy spare room of my rented two-bedroom apartment, a room that doubled as my office, my gym, if you count a dusty yoga mat and a single kettlebell, and occasionally my guest room for the very rare, very understanding friend. The initial idea had come to me during my short-lived stint in a soul-crushingly bureaucratic data entry job, a place where I'd witnessed firsthand the inefficiencies and frustrations of handling complex datasets with outdated tools. Querycraft was my answer to that, born from a desire to create something genuinely useful, something that solved a real problem. It certainly wasn't a lottery win, not the kind of earth-shattering, headline-grabbing tech buyout that mints instant billionaires. Internal laugh, not by a long, long shot. But to me, Mark Harrison, a man whose diet for the better part of his 20s had consisted primarily of instant ramen, value brand pasta, and the occasional celebratory pizza, all meticulously managed through a complex system of careful, almost obsessive budgeting. The figure that now sat pending in my bank account felt like an absolute fortune. It was enough, with careful management, for a substantial down payment on a small, perhaps slightly fixer-upper house on the city's outskirts. A dream I'd quietly nurtured for the better part of a decade. A vision of a small garden, a workshop for my tinkering, a space that was truly mine, not beholden to a landlord's whims or rising rents. And just as importantly, it was enough for a respectable seed fund for the more ambitious, more personal startup idea that had been brewing, simmering, and evolving in the back of my mind for years, a platform dedicated to connecting local artisans with ethical material suppliers. That was the real dream, the one that made my pulse quicken with a mixture of terror and excitement. This money, this unexpected bounty, wasn't just currency to be counted or spent. It was my future solidified. It was my hard-won independence, a buffer against the precariousness I'd always. It was tangible, undeniable proof that my quiet, often lonely, persistent efforts, the countless hours I'd chosen work over social events, substance over style, had finally, wonderfully, paid off. It was validation, and it tasted incredibly sweet. The family summons, a predictable occurrence in the Harrison household, arrived, as it always did, via a cheerful, yet unmistakably non-negotiable, call from my mother, Susan, for our bi-weekly Sunday roast. The rich, often overpowering aroma of her slow-cooked beef, always slightly overdone, a family tradition in itself, internal laugh, and the sound of my father, David's, booming, slightly performative laughter, usually filled their comfortable, if somewhat dated, suburban home, a familiar, well-worn stage for equally familiar, and often exhausting, family dramas. Mark Darling, Mom's voice, a unique blend of warmth and underlying anxiety, had trilled over the phone line just 2 days before. We're all just so terribly eager to hear all about well, your little app success. It's all so exciting, Sin. She'd paused, and I could practically hear the proud smile in her voice. Your father, bless him, is already telling everyone down at the golf club. that his son is the next Bill Gates. I'd managed a weak chuckle at that. Internal laugh. Bill Gates. Right. More like the next guy desperately hoping to navigate the complexities of capital gains tax and afford a mortgage in an increasingly insane housing market. But such distinctions were usually lost on my parents. Success in their eyes was a broad, shiny concept, best understood in large, easily digestible superlatives. It's hardly that, Mom, I demurred, already bracing myself. But yes, it went through. It's good news. Wonderful, wonderful, she'd enthused. So Sunday then, 1 o'clock at Mark. Maybe you could pick up one of those nice dessert torts from that little bakery you like. As a celebration. Another subtle expectation. Another small financial contribution. Seamlessly woven into the fabric of familial love. Internal sigh. I agreed. Of course. It was easier than arguing. I arrived at their meticulously kept, slightly too yellow house, as usual, exactly on time, a small, carefully chosen bottle of decent Cabernet Sauvignon clutched in my hand, a peace offering, perhaps, or maybe just a self-preservation tool, something to focus on, to sip from. When the inevitable conversational landmines started to detonate, the scent of roasting meat and something vaguely like scorched rosemary, Mom's spice experiments were legendary. Internal laugh already permeated the air. My younger brother, Leo, was predictably already there, sprawled artfully across the most comfortable armchair in the living room, a study in curated bohemian dishevelment. His dark hair was perfectly tousled, his vintage band t-shirt, probably costing more than my entire outfit, internal laugh, bore a few strategically placed paint smudges, and his smile, when he finally looked up from his phone, was wide, charming, and utterly, infuriatingly, roguish. At 24, 3 years my junior, but light years ahead in terms of parental indulgence, Leo was a self-proclaimed multidisciplinary creative, a title that seemed to encompass a never-ending parade of grand, ill-conceived, and invariably fleeting passion. Last year, it had been interpretive dance, a pursuit that involved a lot of dramatic leaping in the backyard, and culminated in a single, sparsely attended performance in a community hall that my parents had paid to rent. The year before that, it was an ambitious foray into artisan kombucha brewing, a venture that mostly resulted in a series of small, sticky explosions in the pantry and a lingering smell of vinegar that took weeks to dissipate. And before that, who could even keep track? Abstract sculpting with recycled materials, a short-lived attempt at becoming a drone videographer, a concept album that never progressed beyond a few cryptic song titles. Each venture, without fail, was launched with the boundless, infectious enthusiasm of a true believer, generously, and often blindly, funded by our ever-hopeful parents, and then, just as inevitably, quietly abandoned, the moment the first significant obstacle, or the need for sustained, unglamorous effort, reared its ugly head. He greeted me with an effusive, slightly too energetic hug, his arms slung around my shoulder. Mark, my brother, the digital magnate. Here you're practically rolling in it now. Eh? About time some of that Harrison genius paid off. His eyes, a bright, intelligent blue so like our mother's, held a little too much speculative, almost predatory gleam for my immediate comfort. It was the look of a prospector who'd just heard rumors of a gold strike. Hardly rolling, Leo, I said, gently extricating myself. Just a good outcome. My parents, David and Susan Harrison, emerged from the kitchen, wiping their hands on aprons, their faces wreathed in welcoming smiles. Dad, a man whose opinions were as robust as his physique, clapped me heartily on the back, his pride in my achievement clearly genuine, but, as always, slightly misdirected, a little off. He didn't truly understand the years of complex problem solving, the intricate architecture of code, the sheer intellectual rigor involved in creating. He only understood that it had produced a tangible sum of money, a figure he could casually, or not so casually, internal laugh, boast about to his friends down at the golf club, or during his Rotary Club meetings. That's my boy, he boomed, his voice filling the already noisy room. Knew you had it in you. All those hours locked away with your computers, finally bearing fruit, eh? Mom fussed, her affection a warm, if sometimes cloyingly sweet and slightly smothering, blanket. She straightened my collar, patted my cheek, her brow furrowed with that perpetual maternal concern. Mark, you look thin, thinner than last time. Are you eating properly? Really eating? All that time cooped up in front of the computer. It can't be healthy, dear. You need fresh air, proper meals. I assured her I was fine, that I was eating, that Querycraft was, in fact, now sold, so my screen time would theoretically decrease, though my startup idea was already calling to me. Such practical details, however, rarely seemed to penetrate her well-meaning anxieties. Dinner was the usual, carefully orchestrated affair. Dad's lengthy, often unsolicited pronouncements on the current state of global politics, gleaned largely from the headlines of his preferred newspaper, interspersed with critiques of the local sports team's recent Mom's gentle, almost surgical interrogations about my non-existent social life. Are you seeing anyone special, Mark, dear? That nice girl from your old office? Sarah? What happened with her? In view, which always made me feel like a specimen under a particularly benign microscope, and Leo's dramatic, highly embellished recounting of his latest, almost breakthrough, in the highly competitive and utterly bewildering world of experimental street art, which apparently now involved biodegradable glitter and augmented reality projections, a concept he struggled to explain coherently. I listened, I nodded, I offered carefully constructed, and weren't responses, a well-rehearsed ballet of familial interaction, designed to reveal as little of my true self as possible, while still maintaining the facade of engaged participation. I spoke about the weather, a particularly uninteresting project at my day job, my actual day job as a mid-level programmer for a faceless corporation, the one that paid the bills while Querycraft was my secret passion, and the merits of the dessert tort I had dutifully purchased. Safe topics, bland topics, topics unlikely to invite further scrutiny, or, heaven forbid, unsolicited advice, or then, just as Mom was placing a large, slightly burnt around the edges, but undeniably homemade apple pie on the table, its cinnamon scent momentarily sweetening the tense undercurrents, it began. The shift was almost palpable, like a drop in barometric pressure before a storm. My father cleared his throat, not once, but twice, that familiar, deeply resonant, and utterly portentous sound, that all, without fail, signaled a shift from the shallow waters of casual conversation, to the deep, often treacherous currents, of serious family business. My stomach, which had been cautiously enjoying the pie, gave a little, nervous clench of apprehension. I braced myself. "Ark," he started, his voice adopting that specific avuncular, man-to-man tone he reserved for moments when he believed he was about to impart profound wisdom, or orchestrate a particularly beneficial family arrangement. It was a tone that always set my teeth on edge. "Your mother and I, well, we've been doing a lot of thinking lately, a lot of..." He paused, looking around the table as if to ensure he had everyone's undivided attention, though, let's be honest, when Dad used that voice, undivided attention was less a request, and more a command. "And Leo here," he continued, gesturing towards my brother with a proud, almost proprietary sweep of his hand. "Leo has well, he has a rather brilliant, truly innovative new project he's embarking on. Something quite special, I think." Leo, who had been subtly, almost imperceptibly, prompting Dad with a series of encouraging nods and expectant little coughs throughout this preamble, now leaned forward in his chair, his earlier casual slouch gone, replaced by an actor's posture of intense, almost spiritual conviction. His face, so adept at conveying a spectrum of carefully curated emotions, was now alight with a manufactured, yet undeniably compelling, passion. "It's going to be absolutely massive, Mark, groundbreaking," he enthused, his voice resonating with a fervor that was, I had to admit, almost convincing. If you didn't know his track record, I'm creating this fully immersive, multi-platform, generative digital art experience. It's beyond anything that's out there right now. Think NFTs, Mark, but with actual, tangible soul, you know? Interactive, transformative. It's about connecting humanity through these ephemeral, deeply personal digital installations." He trailed off, his hands, long-fingered and expressive, waving vaguely in the air, as if trying to sculpt his nebulous vision out of the very atmosphere of the dining room. He was, as usual, far more enamored with the sound of the cutting-edge buzzwords, generative, multi-platform, ephemeral, internal laugh, than with any concrete, actionable plan, or, God forbid, a business model. My mother, ever Leo's most ardent cheerleader, jumped in, her eyes shining with a mixture of maternal pride and a slightly bewildered awe at her son's perceived genius. It just sounds so incredibly cutting edge, doesn't it, David? She cooed, reaching out to pat Leo's arm affectionately. Our Leo, he has such vision, such creativity. Indeed, Susan, indeed, Dad rumbled, nodding sagely, his expression one of profound, if somewhat uncomprehending, agreement. Vision is a powerful thing, a very powerful thing. But, as we all know, vision requires resources, doesn't it? Practical support to bring it to life. He paused again, his gaze shifting, slowly, deliberately, until it landed squarely, heavily, on me. And that, Mark, my boy, is where you, with your recent good fortune, come into the picture. There it was, the pivot, the carefully orchestrated, yet utterly predictable, ambush. The inevitable, soul-crushingly familiar segue, from Leo's fantastical dreams, to my tangible, hard-earned reality. I took a slow, deliberate sip of water, the cheap, county fair glass tumbler feeling suddenly heavy in my surprisingly steady hand. I needed a moment, just a fraction of a second, to arrange my features into an expression of polite, mild curiosity, to mask the sudden, icy dread that was coiling in my gut. Oh, I managed, the single syllable emerging far more calmly than I felt internally. How so, Dad? Yes, Mom chirped in before Dad could respond, her smile widening, beaming at me as if she were about to announce I'd just won a Nobel Prize for outstanding familial generosity, a category that, if it existed, I was sure my parents believed I should perpetually be nominated. Internal laugh. We thought, Mark dear, now that you've had this truly wonderful bit of luck, with your clever little app, it would be the absolute perfect opportunity for you to invest in your brother, to be a patron of his art, to help him get this truly incredible, world-changing project off the ground. Her enthusiasm was almost painful to witness, so genuine, so heartfelt, and so utterly, breathtakingly, oblivious to the implications of her words for my life, my plans. Invest, I repeated, the word itself feeling foreign, almost profane on my tongue in this context. It felt like a euphemism, a pretty, businesslike ribbon, tied around a very different, much uglier pack. You mean, you want me to give Leo a substantial amount of my money? Well, now, invest sounds so much more supportive, more collaborative, don't you think? Mom corrected gently, her smile faltering just a fraction, though the underlying steel in her gaze, that unwavering maternal conviction that her way was the right way, didn't waver in the slightest. It's not just giving, Mark. It's about believing in him, in his extraordinary talent. It's about family, supporting family. Leo, seizing the orchestrated moment, with the practiced timing of a seasoned performer, chimed in, his voice now a carefully modulated blend of earnestness, vulnerability, and just a hint of artistic desperation. Exactly, Mark. Mom gets it. This isn't like any of my other projects. I swear, this one is. It's truly different. I can feel it in my bones. But, you know, any big vision, it needs startup capital. Just to get the ball rolling, for the high-spec rendering computer I need, the advanced software licenses, maybe a small, inspiring studio space to really focus. He conveniently, and quite deliberately, omitted the fact that startup capital for his previous, equally game-changing ventures, internal laugh, had largely, and almost immediately, translated into a new top-of-the-line gaming console, for creative inspiration Mark, a series of expensive coffees from artisanal cafes, networking, brother, and an entirely new wardrobe of distressed denim and ironic t-shirts, to better cultivate his emerging artist/influencer aesthetic. How much capital, precisely, are we talking about, Leo? I asked, my voice flat, devoid of inflection, though inside, I was already dreading the inevitable, astronomically inflated answer. I just wanted the number out there, stark and unavoidable, so we could dispense with the pleasantries. Leo exchanged another quick, almost imperceptible, yet deeply significant glance, with our parents, a silent, three-way confirmation of their agreed-upon strategy, before turning back to me,
his expression now a masterclass in carefully crafted hope, mixed with just a dash of humble entreaty. Well, he began, running a hand through his already artfully messy hair, as if the exact figure were a casual, almost trivial afterthought, something he just plucked from the air. To really do it justice, Mark, to give it the launch it deserves, to make the kind of global impact I know it's capable of, I was provisionally thinking something in the neighborhood of, say, 50,000. $50,000, or pounds or euros. The currency was almost irrelevant. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of the sum sucked the air from my lungs. The number hung in the suddenly silent dining room, obscene, outrageous, almost comical in its disconnect from reality, at least, my reality. It was nearly half, of the entire pre-tax amount I'd cleared from the Quarrycraft sale, half of my meticulously planned house deposit, half of my fledgling startup fund, half of my goddamn future, served up like a casual request for a loan to buy a new lawnmower. I felt a cold, sickening wave wash over me, the kind that starts in your stomach and creeps up your spine, followed almost immediately by a reactive surge of familiar, intensely hot anger. This wasn't an ask, I realized with chilling certainty. This was a demand, a beautifully orchestrated, emotionally manipulative demand, wrapped in the pretty, deceptively harmless paper of family support and shared success. Leo, I started, my voice dangerously low, each word carefully chosen, a struggle to keep the tremor of fury from seeping through. That's a truly significant amount of money. A life-altering sum, for me at least. As I believe I mentioned, my plans for that income, the income from my app, were already quite specific, and very important to my own future. My father frowned, his earlier jovial, man-of-the-world demeanor vanishing in an instant, replaced by a look of stern, paternal disapproval. Now Mark, let's not be hasty. Plans can be flexible, especially where family is concerned. This is your brother we're talking about, his one big opportunity, perhaps. You're the stable one in this family, Mark, always have. You've clearly proven you can make money, and make it well, Leo. Well, Leo just needs a bit of a leg up, a little push to get him started on the right path. We all do, sometimes. A $50,000 leg up, I countered, the sarcasm, sharp and bitter, finally breaking through my carefully constructed composure, a more noticeable edge creeping into my voice now. Dad, with all due respect, and I mean that sincerely, Leo has had many legs up from you, and Mom over the years, generous ones. Most of which, if we're being honest with ourselves, haven't exactly panned out, have they? The air in the room crackled with sudden, palpable tension. Mom gasped softly. Leo's face flushed a deep, unbecoming crimson, his artistic cool evaporating under the direct hit. That's not fair, Mark. That's a low blow. Those were learning experiences, part of my creative process. Incredibly expensive learning experiences, Leo, I shot back, the carefully constructed dam of my patience, eroded over years of similar encounters, finally beginning to crumble, to give way. Learning experiences almost entirely paid for by Mom and Dad's retirement fund, if I'm not mistaken. This, however, is my money, money I earned, money I bled for, metaphorically speaking, through years of work you can't even begin to comprehend. My mother, her face now a mask of distress, placed a trembling, placating hand on my arm. Mark, please, darling, don't be like this. Don't use that tone. We're not asking you to just give it away with no thought of return. Of course not. When Leo's brilliant project takes off, and we all know it will, her gaze flickered nervously towards Leo, seeking reassurance he wasn't equipped to give. He'll pay you back, won't you, Leo, darling? Every penny. With interest, even a handsome profit. Leo, ever the opportunist, nodded vigorously, his earlier wounded pride and confidence slightly dented, but rallying with impressive, if utterly unconvincing, speed. Of course, Mom, absolutely. Mark will be my first, my primary, my most valued investor. We'll all be rich. This time next year, we'll be laughing about this over champagne. A short, hollow, unconvincing sound that died quickly in the tense atmosphere. Rich, internal laugh, cold and mirthless. I'd heard that particular refrain before, many times. I looked slowly from my mother's pleading, tear-filled eyes, to my father's stern, deeply disappointed frown, to Leo's desperate, almost frantic, manufactured optimism.
They were a united front, as they always were in these situations, an unbreakable trinity, utterly convinced of the inherent righteousness of their collective request, their unspoken yet deeply ingrained entitlement to my success, my resources, my future. I felt the familiar, crushing weight of expectations settle upon my shoulders, the suffocating burden of being the responsible one, the stable one, the one who always had to make the difficult sacrifices, the one who always had to yield for the perceived greater good of the family, which usually translated to immediate gratification of Leo's whims. But this time, staring at the smeared remnants of my mother's apple pie on my plate, the sweet, comforting scent of cinnamon now entirely gone, replaced by a bitter, acrid taste in the back of my mouth. A different, unfamiliar feeling began to solidify deep within me. It wasn't just anger anymore, though there was certainly plenty of that. It was something colder, harder, more unyielding. A dawning, steely resolve. This wasn't just about money, I realized with a sudden, piercing clarity. Not really. This was about respect. It was about autonomy. It was about my fundamental right to my own damn life, my own carefully considered dreams, my own hard-earned, preciously guarded future. And for that small, vital piece of myself, I was finally, truly, irrevocably ready to. The silence that descended upon the Harrison dining room after my internal declaration of war was thick enough to spread on toast. My mother's lower lip trembled, a prelude to the waterworks I knew were imminent. My father's face was a thundercloud, his jaw tight, a muscle twitching erratically beside his eye. Leo, for perhaps the first time since he'd learned to charm his way out of trouble, looked genuinely nonplussed, his usual arsenal of persuasive tactics seemingly exhausted in the face of my unexpected, stony silence. I pushed back my chair, the scraping sound unnaturally loud in the sudden, suffocating quiet. "Thank you for dinner, Mom, Dad," I said, my voice emerging calmer, more detached than I. Inside, a tempest was raging, but on the surface, I was aiming for an iceberg. It was, as always, an experience, internal laugh, a dry, humorless one. "Mark, don't you dare walk away from this table," my father's voice boomed, regaining its familiar timbre of command. "We are not finished discussing this. This is about family." "No, Dad," I replied, turning to face him fully, meeting his furious gaze with a steadiness that surprised even myself. "I think we are finished discussing it for tonight. This is about my money, my future, and my decision, and I will need some time to consider everything that's been said." It was a partial truth. I didn't need time to consider their request. That decision was already made, a hard, cold knot of refusal in my gut. What I needed time for was to strategize, to build my defenses, because I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was merely the first skirmish, not the end of the war. My mother finally succumbed, her face crumpling as the first tears began to track down her powdered cheeks. "Mark, how can you be so callous, so unfeeling towards your own brother?" she wailed, her voice thick with genuine, if misplaced, distress. "He's family. He needs us. He needs you." Leo, sensing an opening, immediately latched onto her emotional distress. "Yeah, Mark, what Mom said. I thought you'd be happy for me. Supportive. This is my dream." His dream, internal sigh. Another one. "I am always happy for you to pursue your dreams, Leo," I said, my voice softening fractionally, because despite everything, he was still my brother, and a small, foolish part of me still occasionally hoped he might actually achieve one of. But I will not be funding them with money I need for my own. Not this time. I didn't wait for their rebuttals. I gave a curt nod, grabbed my jacket from the hall stand, and walked out into the cool night air, the sounds of my mother's escalating sobs, and my father's indignant sputtering, echoing behind me. The screen door slammed with a satisfying finality that I hadn't quite intended, but didn't regret. The drive back to my small, rented apartment across town was a blur of streetlights and churning thought. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles were white. The anger, which had been a hot, reactive surge at the dinner table, was now cooling, solidifying into something harder, more focused, a cold, resolute determination. They wouldn't let this go. I knew this wasn't just about Leo's latest pipe dream. It was about control, about maintaining the established family hierarchy, where my resources, my successes, were somehow considered communal property, especially when Leo was in need. The $50,000, the sheer, breathtaking audacity of the sum, still made my head It wasn't just a casual request, it was an assumption, a declaration of their perceived right to a significant portion of what I had painstakingly earned. By the time I unlocked my apartment door, the familiar, comforting scent of old books, coffee, and the faint, lingering aroma of the soldering flux I used for my electronics projects, washing over me, I knew I couldn't handle this alone. My family, when united in a common goal, especially one that involved helping Leo, could be a relentless, emotionally exhausting force. I needed an ally, an outside perspective, someone who understood the dynamics, but wasn't enmeshed in them. My first thought was Sarah. Sarah Chen, my friend since our university days, now a fiercely intelligent, no-nonsense corporate lawyer. She'd witnessed, and often commented on, with her characteristic dry wit, the Harrison family circus for years. She was pragmatic, logical, and, most importantly, completely immune to my mother's guilt trips and my father's bluster. Despite the late hour, I poured myself a stiff whiskey, not the cheap stuff I usually kept, but a good single malt I'd been saving, and dialed her number. She answered on the third ring, her voice slightly sleepy, but instantly alert. "Mark, everything okay? It's nearly midnight." "Sarah," I began, taking a large gulp of the amber liquid, the burn welcome in my tight chest. "You are not going to believe what just happened at Sunday dinner." And so, for the next hour, I recounted the sordid tale, Leo's groundbreaking multi-platform digital art experience, the casually dropped demand for $50,000, my parents' unwavering support for his delusion, my own burgeoning, terrified resolve. Sarah listened patiently, interjecting only with the occasional, "Oh, for God's sake," or "Are they serious?" or a particularly empathetic, "You poor bastard," a genuine shared one this time. When I finally finished, the whiskey glass, nearly empty, my voice hoarse, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Okay," Sarah said finally, her voice all business now. "First things first, Maran, that money, where is it exactly?" "It's, mostly in a high-interest savings account," I replied, "the one I set up when the sale was finalized." "Why?" "Right," she said crisp. "Tomorrow morning, first thing, I want you to look into options for making that money less accessible. Not to you, obviously, but to any potential, emotional leverage. Think term deposits, short-term bonds, something that locks it in for a period, even if it's just 6 months or a year. Something that gives you a legitimate, contractual reason to say, sorry, it's tied up, if they come at you again." It was a brilliant, simple idea, the kind of practical, defensive strategy that hadn't even occurred to me in my emotional turmoil. "That's actually a really good idea, Sarah. I have my moments," she said dryly. "Secondly, you need to prepare for the onslaught. They will not take your no, even your implied no for now, lying down. Expect calls from your mother, probably involving tears and accusations of breaking her heart. Expect your father to try and corner you, to appeal to your sense of duty. Expect Leo to swing wildly between wounded artist and entitled brat." "Sounds about right," I sighed, rubbing my tired eye. "So," she continued, "you need a script, a clear, concise, and unwavering message. Something like, 'I love you all, but the money from my app sale is allocated for my own specific, long-term financial goals, including a house and my own business venture. I am not in a position to fund Leo's project, and that decision is final. I am happy to support Leo in other ways, like helping him with a business plan or connecting him with resources, but financial investment is not an option." She paused. "Can you say that, Mark, and stick to it, without jading, justifying, arguing, defending, or explaining. I, I think so, I said, the words feeling both terrifying and empowering to even contemplate saying aloud to my family. It's going to be incredibly hard. Of course it will be, Sarah said, her voice softening with genuine empathy. They've had decades to perfect their manipulation techniques. You're rewriting the rules of engagement. But Mark, this isn't just about $50,000. This is about your entire future, your autonomy. If you cave on this, what's next? She was right. Absolutely right. We talked for a while longer, Sarah offering more practical advice, bolstering my resolve, and making me promise to call her after every anticipated family interaction. By the time I hung up, a sliver of gray dawn was painting the edge of my window, and while the anxiety hadn't vanished, it was now overlaid with a clearer sense of purpose, a roadmap for the battle ahead. The next morning, true to Sarah's prediction, the siege began. My phone buzzed at 8:03 a.m. It was my mother. I let it go to voice. The message, when I listened to it later, was a masterclass in passive-aggressive guilt. Internal sigh. Mark darling, her voice quavered artfully. I just, I just don't understand. Your father and I were so hurt, so disappointed last night. Leo is beside himself, absolutely heartbroken. He truly believed you, of all people, would support his vision. We only want what's best for both our boys. Please, call me. Let's talk this through like a loving family. Yeah, internal laugh. Lovingly talk me out of my own money. I spent the morning researching financial instruments, just as Sarah had advised. By lunchtime, I had an appointment with a financial advisor for the following week, and I'd already initiated a transfer of a significant portion of the Querycraft funds into a new, less liquid account that offered a decent introductory rate for a 1-year fixed term. It felt like building a small, but crucial, fortress wall. The text from Leo started around noon. First, the wounded artist. Mark, I'm crushed. Didn't sleep all night. My entire creative vision feels like it's crumbling. Thought you believed in me, bro. When that elicited no response from me, I was steadfastly ignoring my phone. It shifted to the entitled brat, just as Sarah had predicted. Seriously, Mark, you're just gonna hoard all that cash. Some brother you are. You know mom and dad always bailed you out when you needed it. This last one actually made me laugh out loud. Bailed me out when I needed help paying for my university textbooks, a request they'd met with a lecture on financial responsibility, while simultaneously funding Leo's gap year trip to find himself in Southeast Asia. Internal laugh. The revisionist history was truly breathtaking. My father didn't call until late afternoon. His approach was different. No emotional appeals, just stern, disappointed authority. Mark, his voice was gravelly. Your mother is very upset. You've handled this very poorly. This isn't just about money. It's about respect, about family obligation. I expect you to reconsider your, frankly, selfish position. We will discuss this further when you come to your senses. He hung up before I could utter a word. It was exhausting. The coordinated, multi-pronged attack was exactly what I'd expected, yet it still felt like being battered by waves. But each ignored call, each unanswered text, each moment I held firm to the script Sarah and I had mentally rehearsed, chipped away a tiny piece of the old, yielding Mark, and solidified the new, resolute one. That evening, I drafted an email, not a jade-filled manifesto, but a clear, concise statement of my position, almost verbatim what Sarah had suggested. Dear Mom, Dad, and Leo, it began. I'm writing to clarify my position regarding the request for funding for Leo's new project. While I wish Leo all the best in his creative endeavors, the money I received from the sale of my application has been carefully allocated towards my own long-term financial goals, which include purchasing a home and investing in my own business startup. Therefore, I am not in a position to provide the $50,000 requested. This decision is final. I am, of course, happy to offer Leo support in other ways, such as helping him develop a more concrete business plan, offering technical advice where applicable, or connecting him with any relevant contacts I might have. But direct financial investment is not possible for me at this time. I hope you can understand and respect my decision. Love, Mark. I read it over a dozen times,
my finger hovering over the send button. It felt like pressing the launch button on a missile. Then, with a deep breath, I clicked send. The silence that followed, from their end, was deafening, lasting almost 24 hours. It was an unnerving, anxious quiet, during which I second-guessed myself 1,000 times. But I didn't retract. I didn't apologize. I didn't offer a compromise. I just waited. The storm, when it finally broke again, would be different. I knew it would, because I was different.